I'm going to introduce a man who needs no introduction, Ramzi Khoury, who has that many titles, but basically he is a man who has basically been in lots of private public sector roles in Jordan and throughout the Middle East. He's advised governments, he's worked on the board and as the CEO of many private sector strategic consulting companies, and also most importantly, he's the head of Roya News Network, which is one of the leading news networks online and offline in the Middle East. Ramzi is going to introduce his panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to pay the people of Portugal my personal condolences over the passing away of President Sampaio. I had the honor of working with President Sampaio at the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. May he rest in peace. My deep condolences. Here we start. We also have the honor today of having Her Excellency Memunatu Pratt, the Minister of Tourism of Sierra Leone, with us. We have His Excellency Nayef Fayez, the Minister of Tourism of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, with us. We have Philippe Lévêque, the CEO of CARE France. He's also a member of the leadership of CARE International. He is also here with us. He has a lot of experience, I know, in so many countries all over the world. And great pleasure to have you, Tarek Lassadi, the head of the Tunisian Travel Association. He is with us. Tarek is an entrepreneur. He is the person who created the first online travel agency in Tunisia, Travel to Do.
Yes.
Welcome on board, guys.
Thank you.
I'm going to start this discussion, and we're going to try to keep it as a discussion, but not to forget the great Professor Lee Miles from Bournemouth University. Lee heads the Disaster and Crisis Management Center at the university and a great authority on travel and tourism. Lee is with us online. We're going to see him on the screen very soon.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, please, in a very short term, tell us a bit about yourself and tell us how did COVID affect Sierra Leone?
Yes, let me extend thanks to the government of Portugal and the other organizers and the sponsors for putting this wonderful program together and for extending an invitation to me to participate in this meeting. I am Dr. Memunatu Pratt, the Minister of Tourism and Cultural Affairs. I have been Minister for 3 years in terms of promoting the transformation of tourism in Sierra Leone. But prior to that, I used to be a university professor for many years. And I've come back with all of those experiences because I used to run international programs. But now where we are is about making sure that tourism becomes a key driver of economic diversification for Sierra Leone. Now, the COVID affected everyone. Of course, we all know that it affected the travel and tourism sector. For Sierra Leone, we had more of the economic impact. The least to speak, we did not have as many deaths and we did not have as many cases. But the COVID caught us at a time when we are trying to get the economy on track. So that diverted resources from what we wanted to do in terms of growing tourism, growing health, growing education, putting money into healthcare. So now we have quite a number of our hotels really not having as much guests as possible. A number of people have lost their jobs. And then at the same time, the small businesses too have been affected. But our governments try to ensure that we respond to it by giving some safety nets to the hospitality industry in terms of 3 months salary. And then also putting us on board a number of international projects run by the World Bank and a few others. So that's the kind of way we have been dealing with it. But to say the least, we are fortunate not to have as many deaths and cases, but the economic impact is really, really killing, especially a country where you have very high percentage of youth unemployment. I mean, low-skilled people. And then we are just opening up the country into this beautiful world of tourism, where everybody is now excited and wants to be part of it. But there are lack of skills, there is need for capacity, there is need for more investment, there is need to train more people, and there is need also for government itself to put more money into tourism. So the future is very good because we are having many more people coming into tourism than before. But what we now need to do is how do we meet those expectations?
But your borders are open.
What?
The borders of your country are open.
Yes, we have, our borders are open, except otherwise we had some challenges with our neighbor Guinea. Of course, you know, Guinea had just had a coup d'etat,
Yes.
to share border with us.
Yes.
So we had some challenges with that. And our next door neighbor is Liberia. We did not have as much problem because we normally take a Mano River Union approach because these three countries belong to the Mano River Basin. So whatever approaches we take cuts across the country, and we always take the ECOWAS approach because of the ECOWAS sub-region which we belong to, and then also that is backed by the African Union. In fact, Sierra Leone has just benefited from the COVAX facility in terms of vaccines.
Right.
But we've not had enough vaccines, really, and that is our worry. Our worry is that we will not be able to open as we want, except we are able to roll out the vaccine as it is, with many more people being vaccinated, and then providing support for the hospitality and tourism sector.
How many people have been vaccinated so far in Sierra Leone?
We have not been able to vaccinate up to 2 million as yet. It's a population of about 7 million people.
All right, okay. But we're getting there.
Yes.
I'll move on to His Excellency Nayef again, COVID and Jordan. I know that you're not the first time Minister of Tourism in Jordan. Maybe Her Excellency was not very lucky. 3 years ago, she becomes minister, COVID hits. That wasn't very lucky, Your Excellency. Your Excellency Nayef, you've been minister twice. A bit about yourself, Minister of Tourism twice, and a bit about yourself, and how did Jordan face COVID?
Well, thank you very much for hosting me today, and definitely we thank Portugal for hosting this wonderful event, and we thank the organizers for such an important event at an important time. Yes, I was minister. This is the third time I'm a Minister of Tourism and Antiquity, but I am one of the lucky ones who always come at difficult times. So maybe this is also another challenge for us that we have to face. I was also Minister of Environment, which is a good balance between tourism and environment. That's enough about myself. Let's go to COVID, because I think this is the hot topic that we are always worried about, and we are continuously talking about. There were actions that needed to be taken. These actions were taken, unfortunately, not at a very equal standard for everyone. So if I may say, Jordan, we were maybe some of the people who were aggressive in our approach towards dealing with the COVID. The government has realized that we have to make sure that we get vaccinated as quickly as possible. There were challenges in obtaining the vaccine for a country like Jordan, so we had to put our priorities. Did we get the vaccine? So if we do get the vaccine, that means we have to give up on other priorities that we needed to deal with our economy. But I think it was the right choice, because without vaccination, and I was talking to Her Excellency, the Minister, and we're talking about how it's unequal today between the different countries. We saw countries that have reached to 70-80% of their population being vaccinated, and others are still at a very low, if not even, you cannot give even a small percentage. And this is a problem. The problem is if we have that big difference, overcoming the challenges of COVID is going to be even much harder. And I think it's time for us to focus on making sure that we get as many of the population of Earth being vaccinated as possible, and we cannot have that big difference. We in Jordan have suffered. You said how much did we suffer from COVID? I'm just going to give you numbers. We were down by 76% over the 2019. That means we lost 76% of our 14% of GDP. So that's
14% of GDP.
So our GDP is 14%. Contribution of tourism to the GDP is 14%. So when we're talking about a loss of 76% of tourism, that's a significant number. A very important point that the minister has made. She said, we are glad to see a lot of people who have been encouraged to enter into the tourism industry. We've been through that process. When tourism is relatively new to Jordan compared to many other countries. So we were at a stage where we saw a lot of people have invested in tourism. I don't talk about big corporations, big companies. I'm talking about SMEs, local communities, women, youth. These people that we saw them coming in tourism. Now, we are not, challenges are common in our area. But this is a huge challenge for us, and the time that we are going through that challenge is being long, it's almost a year and a half with non-stop. So we are worried about these people. We are not worried about big corporation going to the bank, and it's easy for them to guarantee funds. We're worried about this person or that lady who have invested everything they have in such an important industry, thinking that this is the future for them, and now with the setback, this is the biggest challenge that we are facing.
And those are the hardest hit always.
Definitely.
That's where it all starts. I'm going to jump to Tunisia. Monsieur Lassadi, how was Lassadi? How was Tunisia affected by COVID?
Merci pour tous les présents. Je vais intervenir en français. Donc la Tunisie, maintenant, nous avons atteint un niveau de 40% de la population vaccinée. Avec les dernières consignes de prison, on est arrivé pendant un jour à vacciner 600 000 personnes en un jour sur une population de 11 millions de personnes. C'est un exploit. Et nous sommes le deuxième pays en Afrique le plus vacciné. Et la course, donc, c'est exponentiel. Tous les jours, le nombre de vaccinés quotidiens augmente. Et la Tunisie devient de plus en plus safe avec cette vague de vaccination. Bon, on a souffert en 2020 comme tous les pays du monde. Et nous avons moins souffert en 2021 avec l'explosion du tourisme intérieur qui est représenté avant en Tunisie pas plus de 5-6% de l'ensemble des arrivées. Aujourd'hui, le tourisme intérieur a dépassé les 20 et 25% des recettes touristiques. C'est un malheur, le malheur du Covid et la crise nous a dévoilé beaucoup de choses et de faiblesses, entre autres l'importance du tourisme intérieur dans chaque pays. Un tourisme fort repose sur un pays qui a un tourisme intérieur fort. Et l'exemple de la France et l'Espagne, d'ailleurs, qui ont des pourcentages autour de 40-45% du tourisme intérieur. Et les États-Unis, on parle de 80% des touristes, ce sont des touristes intérieurs. Donc 40% en Afrique, c'est un excellent chiffre. Et les 600 000 qu'on a vaccinés en un jour, ça dénote d'un système de santé fiable et debout, malgré la crise qu'on a traversée en Tunisie après le 14 janvier 2011, et malgré l'autre tournant qu'on a fait le 25 juillet dernier. Donc c'est un système de santé très efficace à comparer par d'autres pays en Afrique, et un système éducatif efficace, puisqu'on exporte pas mal de médecins tous les ans en France et dans d'autres pays en Europe. On exporte pas mal de médecins tous les ans de la Tunisie.
In comparison between business on the cloud, the online travel shop, versus the travel shop on the ground, how can you tell us about the impact of the economic impact of COVID on this versus that?
Excellent.
Sorry, do you want to
Translate.
Since there's no translation.
Je comprends un petit peu de français. Yes, can you please?
Sorry, yes, unfortunately we don't have an interpreter. chapter, so I'm going to just offer to do what I can. So we just heard that in Tunisia, over 40% of the nation has been vaccinated. They've got an extremely high level of more than 600,000 vaccinations a day. So it's higher than most other parts of Africa, and although they lost a lot of business in 2020, in 2021 there's been enormous growth in domestic tourism, and in fact they've uncovered that they have a very important domestic market which has gone from 5% to 25%. Right.
Great. Great.
The economic, our great MC. The economic impact of COVID on the online business versus the physical business.
Bien évidemment, il y a une très grosse explosion en ligne, que ce soit pour le tourisme ou bien pour d'autres secteurs. Le commerce électronique connaît aussi en Tunisie une explosion exponentielle énorme. On est en train de faire 200% de croissance d'une année à l'autre en ligne. Et le tourisme en ligne, je fais partie avec toute modestie parmi les initiateurs de tourisme en ligne en Tunisie, même le commerce en ligne. J'ai mis en ligne le site en 2004 et beaucoup d'autres expériences. Nous avons créé toute une dynamique sur le marché tunisien avec ce tourisme en ligne-là. Et aujourd'hui, pendant le Covid, vous savez, quand toutes les boutiques sont fermées, surtout pendant les périodes de confinement, qu'est-ce qui reste? Il reste Internet. Donc les gens ont réservé sur nos sites et on a fait des croissances exponentielles incroyables en ligne cette année en Tunisie.
There's been a 200% increase in online consumption of information about travel and media, and also in online bookings. Of course, with all the travel agents being closed, that's something that is only to be expected.
Merci. Philippe, your organization has done a lot of work worldwide. Please tell us a bit about your organization. We know that challenges are not all COVID, and tell us a bit about that.
Thank you. I run the French chapter of a very large NGO called CARE International, and it's an old NGO, and our focus is on fighting extreme poverty in less developed countries. So there's no operation in France, for instance, nor in Portugal, but we do have large operations in Jordan or in Sierra Leone, actually. And we're grateful to the governments of those countries for hosting NGOs like us and letting us work. We have a very special focus on women's rights, girls' rights, on fighting the impact of climate change, which we see everywhere, and we work very close to poor communities around the world in long-term development situations or in emergencies. Clearly, emergencies like the war in Syria, and again, I have great respect for the hospitality, let's use this word again, of the government of Jordan for refugees into Syria, or in Lebanon, for instance, that's facing very harsh times these days. We have had large operations in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in other countries. Now, COVID hit us as well, of course, and in my field of operations, I started in this job like 30 years ago. My first mission to the field was in Rwanda during the genocide. That's really where I started. And usually the way it works is that when there is a big emergency, then there is help coming from all over the world and being delivered somewhere, and we send reinforcement coming from all over, from Japan or Germany or France, to affected countries. And that was the first time that we couldn't. The first time in my life that I saw my colleagues from Madagascar or Sierra Leone, and being alone. Alone because we couldn't dispatch people, there were no planes. We couldn't source neither vaccines at that time, not even masks, obviously, or whatever. And they were left alone to face the issue. And they are exhausted. It was really tough. And what came back from the field was that, in the most affected areas in Africa, or in South America, or in Asia, people were not afraid of dying of COVID. They're afraid of dying of hunger because there is no social safety nets. There might be, as there is in France or elsewhere. There's nothing. If you're locked down, you can't just be locked down. You have to go out on the streets, and you have to work. And there is no insurance. And there's no hospital working. In the country of Mali, there were only 2 machines, respiratory machines, at the beginning of the crisis. 2 machines. There might be up to 20 now, but what can you do? so they had to work, and there is nothing to compensate the loss of activity. So that has been a very hard time for NGOs like mine, or my colleagues from Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, or Save the Children, or Oxfam, the large NGOs. So it has been very important to cooperate with local governments and see what we can do. What would be the impact of a big COVID outbreaks in the camps in Jordan, in the Syrian refugee camps? They would be totally havoc, no control. What will be the impact of COVID outbreaks in large slums, and there are in India or elsewhere? So we cooperated a lot with local governments on social distances. What kind of small activities can we do to generate some money, some income for poor families? What kind of attitudes you can have when there is no mask, no whatever. So that has been the big impact on us. And of course, all development progress we had have been postponed.
Professor Lee.
Hello.
Hello. It is great to see you again, despite online. We're getting used to meeting online, I suppose, worldwide. You've heard our guests here in Evora, and what I would like you to tell us, Professor, a little bit about yourself and your work, but then also to tell us what is new after COVID, especially when it comes to tourism sustainability. What is new, Professor?
Thank you, Ramzi. Thank you for inviting me here, and I hope you can hear me all in the auditorium. In answer to your questions, a little bit about myself. I'm the Professor of Crisis and Disaster Management at Bournemouth University Disaster Management Centre. I've been working on disasters for over 30 years, I would say, and started out working way back in the 1990s on Bosnia and Kosovo and the crisis and disaster challenges there. And worked in many different forums, most recently in the World Bank projects in the Caribbean around Hurricane Irma and dealing with hurricane issues there. And I've worked in Africa as well, and delightfully worked in Madame Pratt's Sierra Leone, where we've had extensive projects working there with the disaster management and tourism groups, in particular in trying to build sustainable disaster management given the challenges that faces there. And just to sort of reinforce what the Minister Pratt was saying, in a sense, one of the success stories of Sierra Leone is that they did actually lock down very quickly the airports and ports when the first waves started. And it's an interesting balance that has a responsibility and a requirement on tourism, which the Minister has been dealing with adequately and very well, I would say. To answer to the second question, which was basically what is the challenges for sustainable tourism? What's the new challenges on the basis of COVID? But I think in practice, and it sort of builds on some of the issues that Philippe was mentioning, I think actually that what we really are involved with tourism is actually what we mean by sustainability itself. And I would say that there are kind of three important issues for sustainable development because of COVID. The first is in many ways what you could call the legacies, creating sustainable travel legacies. That in many ways what COVID has shown is two things, I think. Firstly, it's created a major challenge for the tourism sector because the usual narrative as about being the #1 growth industry for the world and bringing growth and prosperity for all has been challenged by the fact that the tourism itself has been one of the vulnerable industries created from COVID-19. So in a sense, the ability of travel and tourism to provide new narratives about itself, I think, are really important in handling COVID. The other part of that, about the other legacy, for me in many ways, is that we really need, talking about what Philippe was talking about, we need a reality-based narrative now about the impact of tourism. Tourism, in many ways, has many positive elements to it for development, for many economies in the world, but it can also have many negative elements. And the sustainability question there is actually about, well, how can we build the sustainable narrative about what tourism provides in terms of sustainability, not just of its own industry. I remember that Minister Bartlett, for example, talked about that tourism was not just an industry, it was a culture. And in many ways, it's about sustaining a new culture, which is attractive not just for jobs and for dollars, but is also about dealing with the fact that the challenges of making tourism more inclusive. So the first thing is really about travel legacies being challenged by tourism for the sector. I think I would also talk about that one of the other impacts, and often talked about in conferences organised by the Resilience Council, is tourism as a peace dividend or as a peacemaker. And really we're talking about sustainable reconciliation, I think here, that across the world when one has the impact of disasters or crises, then this can actually have both a negative impact, but tourism can actually be a healing industry, can provide opportunities for communities to come together after crisis and disasters. In many ways, Sierra Leone is a good example of that after the Civil War. One may argue to some extent that tourism is a healing industry, provided it's seen by all sides of the community as inclusive. So one of the really important challenges, I think, in many ways about sustainable tourism is that COVID-19 can be a highly divisive discussion about whether you have the vaccine or not, which communities have them or not. And to some extent, to what extent tourism, by bringing people in, is not just seen as bringing in tourism dollars, but maybe seen as bringing in COVID cases as well. So it can be a reconciliation element that's important, but it ultimately means that, as Philippe would talk about, you need inclusive to attract the poverty communities as well. That the borders, the attraction of the dollar, if you like, is not just inside the new resort, the revived resort, and the COVID restrictions apply to that area, but also it has benefits for the outside communities as well. Otherwise, they would see tourism in a negative way and not just in a positive way. And the third element is sustainable development itself. We need to move beyond just seeing tourism, sustainable tourism in terms of growth, jobs or visitor numbers. That will always be important as an industry, but also in terms of the possible redistribution of benefits of tourism. And that means in many ways dealing with the local communities and maybe providing schemes and opportunities where tourism industry is not just providing opportunities for those people that come, but also is providing opportunities for levelling up schemes. And one of the things that seems to be important that we need to consider is, do we need what we would call levelling up schemes funded by tourism as part of their sustainable contribution to the world and to rebuilding after COVID-19? I'm sorry I've mentioned many points there, but these are all built around an inclusive agenda of sustainable legacies, sustainable reconciliation, and sustainable development. I'll stop there, Ramzi, but thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Thank you very much. But in light of what you said, I have a question for the ministers. Minister Pratt, internally, what kind of impact did tourism have on the inside of the state, on the people, on the communities, in light of all of the border troubles?
Yes.
Do we have a story there?
We have a story.
We keep on talking about tourism as a tool for peace. We have to use tourism in order to create that kind of peace, internally, harmony within the nation, but also across borders.
Yes. I should first of all say that for a country like Sierra Leone, we all know that, or those who do not know that, Sierra Leone has been through 11 years of war from 1991 to 2000. And that affected the social fabric of the society, wherein there was so much disintegration, so much divisions, and ethnic polarization and all of that. So after the war, quite a lot of work went into peace building, trying to see how we can build social cohesion. We can use culture to be able to bridge the divide, and then also to let people harmoniously love their country in terms of nationalism, in terms of patriotism. So we've been trying to do that for a very long while. But what was absent in this was the tourism. Tourism was absent because of the fact that there wasn't much focus on that as far as building the peace was concerned. So now that tourism has been brought forward as one of the key areas of not only creating the jobs and not only bringing in revenues, but it has now been seen as a tool for national social cohesion. What does this mean? It means that Basically, for instance, getting people to understand their culture, getting them to appreciate their ethnicity, getting them to understand that there is unity. There are ways in which you can be able to be together. We can be able to share the values, to share the commonalities, and bringing that through events, bringing that through visits, telling them about the historicity of where we are, giving them ideas as to what makes us unique, what makes us distinctive, and then bringing this whole story about travel and linking it to heritage, I think has gone a very long way. So today in Sierra Leone, lots more people are talking about harmony amongst us in terms of what makes us feel much more Sierra Leonean than before. So you can talk about our heritage sites. You can talk about cultural events. You can also talk about how tourism can be able to bring people together in groups, in consultations. So politically, tourism has contributed to a large extent in getting people to know about themselves, to know where they are, to know what makes them unique, to what gives them an identity, which was missing. So culturally, tourism has been able to get people to galvanize together for a common good, but then also to use it as a source of income and a source of jobs.
The common benefit.
Exactly. So the way in which tourism is now being presented politically is a uniting force as far as countries like Sierra Leone is concerned, which means that everybody is trying to be part of what tourism is doing. And the way that it has been presented in a multi-layer, integrative fashion, wherein if you are a paramount chief, if you are a local chief, if you are in health, you are in education, if you are in religion, if you are in politics, something of tourism has to do with you. So one of the things which we have done is that we have actually now developed tourism governance and financial strategy, because we want to move this towards the process of political socialization, and then also having the integrative governance concept. So our development of the governance strategy, consulting people, bringing people together, telling them if you are doing agriculture, you have to talk about agrotourism. If you are talking about health, you have to talk about health tourism. If you are in education, you talk about tourism education, which is part of civic education. If you are talking about the economics of the state, you talk about jobs, you talk about investment, you talk about people who may want to come and develop the economy. If you are talking about climate change, it is related to tourism. You are able to let people understand. Those who are living in coastal areas, those who are living in highly dangerous climate-prone areas, wherein they were exposed to floods. Of course, you remember we had a mudslide in 2014, where we lost thousands of people. So we are connecting integrative development with tourism concepts. So because you love tourism, you listen to us as to what we say, okay? You listen to us in terms of getting you to understand that there's a high risk of climate change, but we need this particular area in terms of tourism. For instance, we have projects which we do for people in local communities. We have quite a lot of communities in coastal areas, and then also on hillsides. These people depend on things like stone mining for them to survive. They have to break the stone because they are very poor, right? So which affects the climate, it affects the nature, and affects the wildlife. We have those people where we have very, very strong deforestation, cutting down of trees, in terms of making business out of it. We have sand mining, depletion of tourism, beach areas. People are using those sands, selling them to people who want to construct houses. So one of the things which we try to do is to bring projects in those areas which can give them sustainable livelihoods by moving them away from these destructive climate change activities, and getting them to understand that there are other alternatives of sustainable livelihood that can also depend on tourism, which means that instead of you going into all of these areas, you can develop a small business. We give you the skills, maybe in recycling, maybe in waste management, yes, maybe in handicraft, so that we move them away from some of this. So that is how we are driving the tourism, reducing poverty, in creating the jobs, and protecting the environment. So we are driving the concept into every homes and local communities.
This is very, very impressive. Actually, even more impressive to have such a strategy in the head of government.
Yes.
Yes. We're going to have to, because we started late, we're going to have to push a little bit more.
So we have lots of this project for the women, the young people,
Fan-
because we are driving
Fantastic,
tourism, poverty reduction, tackling climate change mitigation, vulnerabilities, and developing tourism within those. So it's an integrative process which we are trying to do.
Thank you, ma'am. Your Excellency, difficult question for you. Especially when COVID hit, we heard a lot of ministers of tourism specifically say, you know what, they don't take the Ministry of Tourism seriously. COVID placed the Ministry of Health in a much more prominent position. Suddenly the Ministry of Health was calling the shots.
Well, you know, I think always they've been talking about the importance of tourism to the economy, the importance of tourism to creating jobs, the importance of tourism in general. When it comes to taking actions, it's different. I think I'm gonna disagree with you in one way or another. I think today, because of COVID, they realized the importance of tourism. So today there is much more focus on what happened and how much we lost because of lost opportunities because of what happened of COVID. In Jordan, it's for the first time where we see the government coming in and putting tourism on top of the priorities. So today it's an opportunity for us to prove to them.
So was it a wake-up call?
It is. I think it's a wake-up call. Now with the health issue, that's a different story because the pandemic was new to everyone. No one had the right answer for what should be done. So I think we were all being tested on, not only in Jordan, but I think globally. And this is where we were talking about us all coming together to understand, learning from each other lessons and mistakes. Instead of going through that same mistake again, we could learn and prevent happening in one country or another. I think this is where the ministers of health, you have to compromise today. We took a decision in the tourism industry. We're not going to go and face the health experts. We're going to work with them. We told them, let's work together, see how can we bring tourism as quickly as possible. Instead of saying no to them, we say, let's work and see what can we do. And we have succeeded in one way or another. Because at the beginning, you remember, especially in Jordan, we were under total lockdown. I mean, everything was under total lockdown. So we said, it doesn't work. Once you lock the country down, what's going to happen to the economy? You have to do that good balance. So I think tourism was one way of coming in as quickly as possible and saying, the tourism industry, we can focus internally. Let's focus on our people, local tourism, restaurants, hotels, travel within the country, and show that if we are successful in doing that, we can open up gradually to the rest of the world. And I think this is one of the important lessons that we have learned. I think it was a success for us, where we moved from local tourism to also opening up for the rest of the world. Still, we are facing challenges with other countries looking towards Jordan or internally. So they are not looking at the same way. They are following what their countries are saying. So the challenge is not the health industry or the health ministers or those who are in charge of health talking about their country, but talking about other countries. And I think today, when we had those red, green, and amber traffic system that they were implemented, it was unfair. Even within a country itself, you cannot take that same standard and apply it across the board. And it has been applied, I think, across the whole world. Choosing that these countries, I have to apply to it. Agreeing maybe in Europe, there was some talks that we will work together within the region. And even in Europe, they were difficult times for them to agree. Now they are agreeing, I think, to have something in common within Europe, but not with other countries. And I think a country like Jordan or countries outside the European Union, it is still a big challenge. This is one thing that we are hoping to come up with solution here in this conference, to talk to the rest of the world. Listen, let's talk about situations, cases in particular, and how to deal with it.
Thank you. Philippe, your organization has been working with local communities all over the world, and you've seen the effect of tourism on these communities. What are your messages to the travel and tourism industry that you would like to send out? Because our MC is going to make us stop talking in a minute. I want to hear your recommendations.
I remember working a couple of years ago with Thomas Cook, the former Thomas Cook, the real ones, and they started questioning themselves, and they looked at the global value chain. And in such a fragmented industry, it's a real challenge to look at the global value chain, from the customer, the one who is spending $100 on something, to the communities, and etc. And so they did this survey on how much was going back to the local community around the resort in Ivory Coast. Not for the people who had a job at the resort, but for those around, And out of the 100 euros that were spent by the tourists, less than 50 cents were remaining in the local community. There were taxis, of course, there were direct jobs. But the rest of the value goes back to the carriers, to the hotels, and etc. I understand, of course, the issue, but the complexity of the chain. But to me, that is the issue. If there is not more in the business model going back to the local community, those who do not benefit at all, those who lose their water, their trees, their sand, whatever, someday they erupt. And there is violence, and then the change, is challenged. So my plea to the industry would be think global, look at the global value chain, and that's complicated, and change the business model and give back more to the people.
Thank you. Tarek, how is this going to work? Every single country has its own rules dealing with COVID. We all know that COVID is not seasonal. It's not going to go away in the winter, nor is it going to go away in the summer. And people are getting vaccinated, yet there is still disruption. How is this going to work? Do you have any recommendation to governments in order to support the travel industry?
Merci pour la question. Tout à l'heure, le secrétaire d'État au tourisme français a dit « Quand je parle à mes patrons, ils m'écoutent ». D'où l'importance du tourisme. Quand le tourisme souffre, toute l'économie souffre. Et on l'a vu, Airbus et les fabricants d'avions, ils souffrent quand il n'y a plus d'avions qui volent. Donc c'est pour un petit peu rebondir sur le sujet de l'importance du tourisme dans toute économie, pas que la France d'ailleurs. Donc moi je vais aborder un sujet par rapport au Accor. Ils ont fait quelque chose depuis quelques années. Le groupe Accor, ils ont travaillé avec les producteurs de café dans l'Amérique latine. Ils ont fait une action. Parce que si vous faites la pression sur des petits artisans, des petits cultivateurs qui produisent du café, dans 10 ans, 20 ans, il n'y aura plus de café parce que ces gens-là n'arrivent plus à reproduire du café. Donc, ils ont fait une action, ils achetaient le café avec une marge confortable pour les producteurs locaux, d'où ces producteurs ont pu faire de la croissance, on peut produire mieux, dans des conditions meilleures, etc. C'est la même chose pour les tours opérateurs. On a essayé le communisme avant, on a essayé le capitalisme. Aujourd'hui, le paradigme doit changer. Il y a quelque chose qui va se passer dans le monde. Il y a une tierce issue qu'on doit vraiment explorer avec ce qu'on a vu dans le Covid. Les tours opérateurs, ce qu'on a vu, les gros tours opérateurs qui se déplaçaient dans des pays comme la Tunisie, le Maroc, la Jordanie, l'Égypte, ils venaient avec des Excel, ils imposent des tarifs. Ils s'en foutent de vos charges, de votre rentabilité individuelle, etc. Voilà mes prix, je veux acheter avec ces prix-là. Ça ne peut plus continuer comme ça parce que le tourisme, c'est comme la terre. Quand une terre est surexploitée et mal exploitée, cette terre-là ne peut plus produire dans quelques années. Oui. Donc le tourisme, si vous tirez vers vous et vous voulez de l'intérêt immédiat sans voir les prochaines années comment les choses vont tourner, donc on va s'arrêter un jour et il n'y aura plus de destinations touristiques. Donc il faut préserver nos îles, il faut préserver nos côtes par rapport à la consommation de l'eau. Par exemple, moi je viens de l'île de Djerba. From the Djerba Island in the south of Tunisia. Il y a un exemple qui dit la plus belle femme du monde ne peut pas donner plus qu'elle a. Donc à Djerba, nous avons une superficie, nous avons une densité humaine, nous avons une croissance et un taux de natalité X.
Oui, merci.
Avec les touristes que nous avons, on ne peut pas à l'infini recevoir des touristes et faire comme si rien n'était. On doit repenser le modèle touristique et faire attention à notre nappe phréatique et à l'énergie renouvelable, etc.
Oui, merci.
Okay, I'm going to do that very, very quickly. Basically, the French minister earlier on said that when I talk to my bosses, they listen to me because in France especially, the impact on the overall economy was very noticeable with the decline in Airbus, etc. Next example that was raised was that the Group Accor has been investing in buying coffee from local coffee producers throughout the world at comfortable margins, which allows those coffee producers to grow. And that there are many examples now that actually show that tour operators are approaching the economic model in a different way and not just coming in and imposing their prices, and that they have to respect what's going on in the local community so that they give back. And actually, I will interject that the Travel Corporation today highlighted that quite well in the examples that they were giving through the Treadwright Foundation, which wasn't mentioned by the gentleman here, but that basically, you know, we can't just go on exploiting local communities as tourism destinations, and we have to change the economic model and give back.
Again,
Oh,
thank you.
great.
Professor Lee, do we really need to reconsider the definition of sustainable tourism?
In my view, yes, we do, and in the sense that I'll give you a very simple practical example that across Africa and across the Philippines, across many of the places where I work as a disaster management specialist, there's a real need to not just provide dollars, but a reconnection of the global value chain with the local communities, which Philippe and Daniel have alluded to. Why is that fundamentally important? Well, let me put one scenario to you. I'm often in Africa in places where I may see the development of a new resort, which provides jobs and opportunities and can provide many examples, for example, of investment where tourism is investing in that local area. But it will often have its own fencing. Jobs will be coming inside the resort, but not go outside the resort. And fundamentally right next, and that may lead to the development of nice new beaches, which are sustainable according to new sustainable standards, according to new waste restrictions. And right outside, there will be a poverty-stricken community which is involved in beach mining, which is affecting the beach further down because of their need to develop their own economies, which will eventually create a disaster management crisis when the whole coastal line is affected by climatic change. So here, in a sense, I think it's really about a reconnection, which is not just about a redistribution, but it's also about a levelling up of the narrative. That if the tourism dollar, if the tourism communities, in the way that Madam Pratt and others were talking, is not reconnected and the poverty element shown to be important, then this will only create a problem where the sustainable tourism itself is seen to be a failed narrative and something that will not be invested by governments, because there will be so much pressure from the outside communities not to deal with, to find other ways to support them. So in a sense, I'm arguing that there's a self-motivated interest, not just in providing selective examples about how we're providing inside our own resorts, but really about providing rather larger levelling up schemes in which the tourism industry, as it gets its feet, is seen to be providing those very critical examples. In many ways, I guess what I'm saying is it's a more ambitious agenda of sustainable tourism that is the key, but is at the heart of sustaining the tourism industry as an industry and not just as a culture. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you, and thank you to all of you.